Hello and welcome. I'm excited to introduce our first reader, Susan Desola. Susan Desola's poems have appeared in many venues such as the Hudson Review and PN Review, and in anthologies including the Best American Poetry 2018. She is a winner of the David Reed Poetry Translation Prize and the Frost Farm Prize. She holds a PhD in English from the Johns Hopkins University and has published essays and reviews as Susan Desola Rodstein. Her photography is featured in the chapbook Little Blue Man, and her poem A Party for Kevin has been set to music by composer Lori Laitman and will premiere at Lyric Fest in Philadelphia in March. A native New Yorker, she lives near Amsterdam with her family. Please join me in welcoming Susan Desola.
Hi, I'm Susan Desola, and I'm very happy to be reading tonight for Able Muse Press. My book, Frozen Charlotte, was brought out last year by Able Muse Press, and it has just been brought out in a beautiful hardcover edition as well. I've done a number of Zoom readings this past year, some of which are on YouTube under my name, Susan Desola. So I'm going to read tonight some poems that I've read before, but also some poems that I've never read for an audience before. I'm going to start with a poem that I read that's set here. It's called The Tulips. We bought them at a farmer's field, so plump and red, great goblets, plush concavities, which made of content and irrelevancy. For days we took delight in their post-mortem magic. What had this red exuberance to do with death? They anchored down the table, held center stage, just like an aria, a swelling note we held against the odds. But now they start to fall apart, and see, they deconstruct so cleanly. Diving petals reveal a pattern on the inner corner, a three-point wedge of aubergine black, capped by arching yellow bands, a stylized print of itself in little, vector to the ribbed red flank, which had barely aged. The tiny tulip print anticipates its slide to symbol. The sleekly flattened violet pistils spill out scarcely any powder. Slim green stalks with small white crowns stand bare. Abstract, a Dutch bob slouching flapper of a flower. So modernist and sleek, a silhouette, a flower a cartoonist might invent. I sweep the petals up in big bunches, the dustbin blazing. It had never looked better, but it's become almost a game. The petals fall at random, yet they seem to fall in answer to our conversation, plunging at key words, thumping downward during our significant pauses, heard in silences. Blousy, lipsticked interlocutors, drunken smacks, and dried out goodbye kisses. Mouse time. They say all creatures' hearts may last an equal number of beats, 1 billion for the whale as for the mouse, an equal measure to be drawn. And so the whale's slumberous drum for decades dilates water rings, and so the mouse from dawn to dawn spins whole seasons on a wheel. The scrap of mammal sings a rushed song of hurrying mouse. The too long tail marks its trail, staccato zeal, a countdown of time in starts. I have 5 children, and I have boy-girl twins, and their relationship is really a marvel, how close they are. And one of the most incredible things that happened was the first sentence that my daughter ever spoke. She spoke to us one morning while my husband and I were still in bed, barely awake. And what she said gave us the chills, and it still does. Twins. A stolen morning long in bed, I hold you near my cradled head, entangled in our common doze, our hands in hands and toes on toes. We told the kids we'd sleep in late, but heard a knock, one could not wait. We were not up as rules require, subordinating our desire to duties that inhere in mother, this first sortie without her brother. Feet like small buds peep under flannel. Her head just clears the bedboard panel. A tiny finger to her lip. She gazes, haltingly let slip that she is thinking, taking measure of our strange rarity of leisure, of our appearing one, though two, while barely speaking yet she knew that it was somehow less and other than her deep bond with her twin brother. What play of judgment at this vision directs her gesture's slow precision? The finger rises up and limbs us, then the word that ends begins. Its verdict, twins. You are not twins. Still gives me that feeling. The next poem I'm going to read is a subject that I think is underrepresented in poetry. And I'm glad I'm actually reading it in a Zoom reading because otherwise I might be too embarrassed. It's a celebration of the male nude, the male body, a change from celebrating the female nude. And it begins with the conceit of the blind Indians feeling an elephant trying to determine what it is. It's called Blind She Considers Her Lover. 6 blind Indians felt the elephant and made of it 6 entities. So is my love, for in the dark where half a marriage is spent, you are many. First, there is that silky fringe of frontward falling hair. You are a horse, fetchingly groomed. You shake your head, and your forelock falls forward, steed. Then there are your collarbones, which roll like the bone of shells rolled by water collected in pebbles and driftwood and weed. You are shells on a beach, resting in kelp hollows. Then the smooth skin of your back, it sings with softness. You are bolts and drapes of some rich fabric, organic weave of silk to velvet. Yes, you are a draper's treasure. Lower, there is warmth and coils, springs, countless corkscrews of millimeter breadth. I would guess a fine steel wool, its gauge, innumerable zeros. The legs are sturdy, lightly forested. Surely they are lichened logs. Yet between the moss and the steel, the strangest skin, unlike any other, stretched, nerve-rich, another color. Even if I were a blind Indian, I'd know it. It is itself. It is not like another. The next poem I'm going to read is about the adventure of a cricket that was meant to be food for a frog that wound up in the underworld under the baseboards and kept everybody awake for 3 months. It's called Paola and the Cricket. He'd wanted a frog, not a tarantula or snake. It seemed simple, a dish for rocks, water, and plants, and a daily diet of live crickets. She'd buy whole batches crawling. She teased them out one by one with pincers. Squat and still, the tongue uncoiled, cleft and sticky, would ladle one in. The great jaws of hell swinging shut in bug-eyed glaze of fixity and muscular chewing. Hating it, she kept up the system. Her son expected it. One rogue bug escaped, disdained his fate as frog food, or fish bait, found a way under the floorboards, to the crawl spaces, a warm duct or molding panel, lived there on soggy bits, smaller bugs or spores. In the perpetual dark, he sawed wings, their serrated edges and acoustical sails to bloom each night, marring her sleep. For months he sang with his wings, to wail his brother's fates, to lure a mate, to castigate. 3 months she did not sleep, 1,000 auguries, and at crack of dawn, they met again, bleary-eyed in the bathroom light. He was fat and silent. He'd prospered below. It took not a moment's thought. She shot her wool-slippered foot from the flaps of her robe, crushed it on the spot. This next poem is also about sleep, and it's called Eve Sleeps. And the original title of this poem was Spooning. But I also like to think that it's the first night that Adam and Eve spent outside the Garden of Eden. Eve sleeps. Each night we form a double C, hand rests on hip or curves to breast, chest to back, his strong legs pressed to make a chair of flesh for me. Adjudications of the breath, Adam's apple near my head. We're stacked for storage in this bed as sleep suspends us near a death. Twins in the dark, we knit a seam from toe to crown, a tensile wire. Our eyes roll blind, they roll desire. Locked in body, branched to dream, we fall into this darker space. Each cannot see the other's face. And now I want to read a comic interval, 3 tiny comic poems. And the first one is called Thoughts on Cheese, because I don't think there's enough cheese poetry in the world. A standing block of cheese is milk, not at its ease. Seen through a microscope, it's writhing with false hope and swarming with bacilli that scurry willy-nilly. It seems like this must be the milk's finality, but is in fact a plea for immortality. The next one is a cat epigram, because we all need cat epigrams as well, and it's called The Height of Pride. The cat's made of stature, a singular art. His tail in the air is his loftiest part. And the last of these is an epigram about a giraffe. It's called Post-Lapsarian Giraffe. Although blessed in being tall, they are doomed at birth to fall. Now back to our regular programming. I'm going to read 2 more poems. This one is called Bluish Animals, and I think many of you know Louise Bogan's variations on a sentence in which she responds to Thoreau's observation that blue animals are scarce. And so I am responding to Louise Bogan's response to Henry David Thoreau. And this poem is called Bluish Animals. Bluish monkeys, one small shrew, the cat they call the Russian blue. The purebred rat, and peacocks too. Yes, bluish on the land are few, but bluebird is defined by blue, and countless sorts that fly or flew. The largest animal's the whale. His head is blue, and so's his tail. So many fish are blue of scale. Being confined to air or sea, these challenge visibility, as though for God especially. For camouflage may make us blind, to earthly elements confined, while blue is heaven's private mind. For sea and sky have no real hue, its light they borrow shining through. Although they may be hard to view, a wealth of animals are blue. And this is the last one I'm going to read. It's the first time I'm reading it really for anybody, although it's not a recent poem by any means. It's called 2-Part Song. Part 1, Preserved Things. Of most things come and gone, remains little song. The milk got drunk, the egg got fried, the bleached colors of the Polaroid lied. Moth wings break into crumbs, parts don't add up to sums. Yes, most things will slip and slide, eroding in the great elide. I sing now of preserved things, of whorls of wood and table rings, calico corn, golden red, like relic teeth in an ancient head. Ageless pussy willows in a glass, far from their lost river pass. An arrangement, too, of white moon-warped pods stretched tight like the papery skin of a drum, forgetful where they traveled from. Yes, all these things make a mighty sum. To this add things from the fridge, surviving on their Arctic ridge, a jar of pearl onions on a shelf, a wishbone drying on the sill. Probably it lies there still. Let us add the things that freeze, an ice age of meat and peas. Yes, I sing a song of things preserved, the parched, the pickled, dried, conserved, inert but alive. Unlike me, they disdain to grow, not dead, but changeless, outside flow. The answer to a riddle I wished not to know. Part 2, Things Thrown Away. To live is to scatter even things that matter, to send on its way that which would stay. I am mighty, lift crates, push boxes, flatten gates, jettison the jetsam, float away the flotsam. It's an art to lose it, Bishop said. All I want is in my head. Let photos curl, let knits unpearl. A collage I made too long unseen. It's cutting slot to magazines. The codfish from the freezer flies, swims back to streams. The cat, the dog, both long dead. Granny too, and what she said. They leave a little heap of stones. All may join in general decay, rosebuds gathered when they may. The clothes may soon fall to tatters, the roof crush a sinking wall. I'd like to leave without a trace, dissolve the lines that line my face. Live lightly on the dropping earth, grow all compact and white and spare, a cube of nothing, small and rare. If I squeeze it small, it all fits there, a rolling die in rarefied air. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Susan. Those are wonderful. And our second reader tonight is William Baer. William Baer has been the recipient of a Fulbright, a Guggenheim, and a Creative Writing Fellowship in Fiction from the National Endowment for the Arts. He's the author of 25 books, including 3 novels, 2 collections of short stories, and 7 collections of poetry, including The Unfortunates, recipient of the T.S. Eliot Award, and more recently, Formal Salutations, New and Selected Poems. He's a graduate of Rutgers, NYU, South Carolina, where James Dickey directed his dissertation, Johns Hopkins, and USC's School of Cinema, where he received the Jack Nicholson Screenwriting Award. Please welcome Bill Baer.
Okay, so am I being heard? Okay, thank you. So this is going to be quite a change of pace after Susan's wonderful poems. Susan, I knew we had Hopkins in common and poetry in common, but we also I have twins and a boy and a girl also. So anyway, thank you, Chelsea. It's a pleasure to be reading this evening with such talented writers as Susan and Aaron. What I'm going to be doing is quite a change of pace, obviously. I'd also like to thank our extraordinary publisher and editor, Alex Pepple. The new novel, New Jersey Noir Cape May, with this cover that I think is wonderful that Alex designed, is a standalone sequel to New Jersey Noir, the first book in the series published by Able Muse in 2018. Both books are hard-boiled mysteries featuring a tough guy detective, Jack Colt, who's a direct descendant of Samuel Colt. Jack lives in very tough Paterson, New Jersey, not too far from where I am, on top of Garrett Mountain, which overlooks the city. So tonight I'm going to read chapter 5, which takes place in Colt's downtown office at 18 Marshall Street. In the previous 4 chapters, several murders take place, and Colt visits his main confidant, his 98-year-old great-great-uncle, a Jesuit priest, to discuss the fact that Colt's secretary and one-time love interest, Roxanne Faulkner, known as Rox, has left town and returned to California. 2 other notes that might help with chapter 5. Lucas Salerno is a detective with the Passaic County Courthouse, and he's Jack's best friend. And also the Pine Barrens are a huge, over 1 million acre, very rural Pine Barren ecosystem in southern New Jersey. So chapter 5, 18 Marshall Street, Wednesday, March 25th. The speaker came on. Am I interrupting the cannoli scene? It was Mrs. Doris Salerno, Luca's grandmother, who'd once run the office for my now deceased uncle, who'd been, ever since Rox took off for California, filling in at the reception desk. I answered her question with a question. How do you know I'm not watching Godfather 2? She didn't miss a beat. She never did. Am I interrupting the "we was like the Romans" scene? I refused to respond. It might seem strange to anyone living outside the boundaries of the beautiful Garden State that such a loving, self-sacrificing grandmother could also be a perfect wise ass. Welcome to New Jersey. You've got a potential client waiting in your luxurious waiting room, Mr. Richard O'Brien. Maybe he can get you up off your ass. Mrs. Salerno, Nana, had once been a librarian. She'd also mothered and grandmothered the entire extended Salerno brood. And she always treated me and Luca like idiots, like children, even now. What does he want, I wondered. It seems he believes you can solve a crime. Remember those? When I asked him why, he said because he's supposed to be the best. Who could dispute that? Whether or not it was true, I'd picked up the best reputation 2 years ago when the governor's loco youngest daughter went missing, and I tracked her down inside the Pine Barrens. A few other cases also cemented my rep. As a result, a parade of sadly desperate characters from all over the metro area, hoping against hope, tried to get through my door at 18 Marshall Street in downtown Paterson, 2 blocks from the courthouse, right across the street from the county jail. I decided that the poor guy in the waiting room had suffered enough. Besides, no one ever got the upper hand with Luca's Nana. Send him in. He came through my office door carrying a little leather briefcase, and unlike most of my other visitors, he paid absolutely no attention to the surrounding office walls, covered with frame shots of NFL linebackers. I'd done a bit in the middle and high school, and all the legendary New Jersey singers, Whitney, Sinatra, Springsteen, etc. This guy was focused. He told me that he'd driven up from Cape May, which is about 2.5-hour drive, and I asked him why, and he told me a murder. Then he corrected himself, 2 murders. I was willing to listen, have a seat. He sat down on the other side of my desk as I unholstered my python and put it on the desk in front of him. It was my habit to make my clients nervous, to make them fully aware that I was deadly serious. And of course, there was no more effective means of imitation than the appearance of a Colt Python, the most accurate handgun in the world, the best all-around handgun in the world, given to me by my uncle when I was 12 years old. Created, of course, by the Colts. It's deep royal blue double action, hyper affirmative, and just like the old Revolution flag with the coiled snake that said, "Don't tread on me," this particular python said without equivocation, "Don't F around with me." Luca Salerno was my best friend, but my Colt Python was my second best friend. O'Brien didn't seem bothered by the gun at all. Maybe it reassured him he wanted help, and he sat there and stared at me like a supplicant high school student. Are you wondering what the guy looked like? A smaller Liam Neeson, maybe 6 foot, certainly not 6'6", and without the classic Neeson edge. Wearing a blue tinted dress shirt, tieless, and a preppy Navy sports coat. Maybe 55, nicely preserved with that casual and unpretentious air of money and distinction. This was a long-time habit, one that was very helpful in my line of work. It was something that my uncle and I had started doing when I was still a kid, long before I went off to Rutgers to become the only nascent PI in the history of the world who double majored in philosophy and cinema. So we started using the entire Hollywood roster, the wide range of Hollywood stars, to describe our clients, witnesses, snitch, thugs, and so on. This one looks a little bit like Bob Mitchum. This one looks like the young Maureen O'Hara. This one wishes he looked like James Dean. Since the old man, my uncle, knew his films almost as well as me, we used the entire scope of Hollywood history, from the silence to the present. So this one looked a little bit like Liam Neeson without the particular set of skills. That was my job. How can I help? Amazingly, he told me some guy named Edward Colt, who was apparently some kind of PI down in Cape May, had gotten himself shot to death last night, in his own backyard. Are you related, he wondered? Never heard of him. Are you sure he's a PI? I thought I knew every private investigator in New Jersey, and I also thought I knew every Colt in New Jersey. I'm sure. I hired him 9 days ago to look into a cold case involving my daughter. Now he's dead, and I'm suspicious that the murders are related, which seemed feasible. But I was still baffled by this now dead Colt character. How long was he working in Cape May? Just a few months. Before that, he worked in Pennsylvania and Harrisburg with good references. Tell me about the cold case. It was perfectly obvious that that's why O'Brien was really here. My daughter was murdered 10 years ago. She was 17 at the time. Tell me about it. She was out with some friends, vanished for a day, then someone saw her car driving across the beach into the ocean near Cove Beach Jetty. They found her dead in the trunk of the car. I remembered it, some of it. It got a lot of press. Naturally, the water in the trunk made me think of The Killing, that Who Killed Rosie Larson television series that I'd watched when it first aired on AMC. I wondered if one inspired the other. She had a twin, right? Yes, but her sister wasn't there that night. I was intrigued, definitely. Besides, Lucas said I needed a case. Tell me about yourself. I'm a judge at the Cape May County Courthouse, mostly divorce court arbitration. I've lived in Cape May my whole life, and I'm divorced myself, living with my daughter. I liked the guy, so I told him that I'd come down to Cape May and look into it. He was relieved, grateful. There's something else, he said. I waited. 2 days ago, Colt came to my house and gave me the key to his office and a copy of his will, which he'd recently drawn up. For some reason, the will left me all of his money and all of his office files. Why? I don't know. I was very uneasy about it, and I certainly don't need the man's money. But he said that he'd become obsessed with my daughter's cold case and that he wanted it solved regardless of whatever might happen to him. Did he think he was in danger? He didn't act like it. How well did you know him? I hardly knew him at all. We met a couple of times about the case. That was it. Did he have any family? His mother died recently. I never heard about anyone else. So you went along with it. I did. I tried to discourage him, but he insisted and I relented. I had no idea that he'd be dead the next day. O'Brien opened his briefcase, pulled out a bunch of files and put them on my desk. When I heard he was shot last night, I immediately went to his office and got his files. There wasn't much. He'd only been working the case for 9 days. Then I found this. He put a healthy stack of bills on my desk. It was in one of the files. It was $25,000. The bills had a yellow Post-it attached, so I picked up the $25,000 and read the note. Remittance for Jack Colt. I looked back at the judge. He wants you to solve the case, he said. Then he corrected himself, both cases. When O'Brien was gone, I entered my uncle's dimly lit office and stuffed the cash in the safe. The room was full of books and files and documents, but it was empty. And I sat down on the top of the desk. Tom Colt, who was actually my great uncle, had been the most important person in my life, raising me after the death of my parents in a car crash 31 years ago. In truth, Tom Colt was the best private dick in the metro area, and he taught me everything I knew. The only thing he never taught me was how to deal with a life without him. I'd have to figure that out on my own. I'm not a brooder, and the Colts certainly aren't sentimentalists, but we're human, and I miss them a lot. So I shifted focus and thought about Rocks, which he wouldn't have minded at all. 2 short months ago, the boss was working away in his office right here in this room, and Rocks was sitting out in the waiting room at the reception desk. Life, despite all of its natural crap, was good, very good. But now he was dead and buried in Cedar Lawn Cemetery, and Rox was back home in California, Hermosa Beach, 3,000 miles away, trying to figure me out. Good luck with that. Last night, just before I left Stone Tower, the old Jesuit asked, "What'll she do?" Meaning, when her year of thinking it over is over, what do you think she'll decide? Yes or no? I told him what I thought. No. Why should she want me? As a matter of fact, why should any woman want any man, period, given our self-absorption and barbaric behavior? I stood up and looked at myself in the mirror. Tom Colt was never vain like his nephew, but he was always neat and meticulous and professional, and he never left the office without checking himself out. I stared at the creep in the mirror. He was 32 years old, trim, a tough guy, 6'2", and essentially in your face. He was wearing one of his 24 identical black Armani suits, one of his 36 identical navy button-downs, and one of his 40 thin black ties. I couldn't see the color of his eyes, which are dark, dark brown, because all of the day and all of the night he wears light force shades from Ray-Ban. The Colts are pretty much immune to the cold and the heat, but they're light sensitive, whatever that means. Even in the dimly shadowed lights of the room, I could see the never discussed 1-inch cross scar in the smack dab center of his forehead. As for his hair, it was thick, the blackest black, and slicked and greased back like a Jersey Guido. I looked at myself as objectively as I could. I looked like some kind of mob flunky, the scary kind, the one you don't want to run into in a dark alley. I tried to imagine meeting myself in a dark alley, but it didn't work. I was too cocky to be spooked by myself. Back to the fundamental question, how could a woman, any woman, want a piece of that? Especially a fun-loving California volleyball-playing beach girl. What the hell is volleyball anyway? But it wasn't just me. How could any woman want any man? I thought of that scene in Bergman's Smiles of a Summer Night. Gunnar Borgestad, the greatest actor in film history, by the way, and my own particular favorite, has just fallen into a puddle. So his ex-lover, the lovely Eva Dalbeck, gives him a ridiculous nightshirt and an even more ridiculous nightcap, with a tassel no less. Then she leads him over to a mirror to show him how silly he looks, and Borgestad makes no attempt to duck the issue. How could a woman ever love a man? Good question. Then he wonders out loud, can you tell me that? Dalbeck explains. A woman's view is seldom based on aesthetics. Exactly. Another woman's voice suddenly squawked out from the speaker on the desk in the next room. Did he leave a retainer? She was busting my balls again. Yeah, $25,000. I thought that might shut her up. Is that all? Thanks for listening. I realize it's very different from all the lovely poetry we're going to hear tonight.
Thank you so much, Bill. And Alex, just as Bill was reading, Alex just passed on to me that Bill's New Jersey Noir, Cape May, has just received a starred review at Publishers Weekly. So well deserved. So congratulations again to Bill. I'm going to post the link to that in the chat in just a moment in case folks would like to read it. And now for our third and final reader this evening, Erin Poochigian. Erin Poochigian earned a PhD in classics from the University of Minnesota and an MFA in poetry from Columbia University. A winner of the Able Muse Book Award with Manhattanite, published in 2017, and a finalist with The Cosmic Purr, published in 2012, and the current winner of the Richard Wilbur Award. He has also published a book of narrative poetry, Mr. Either Or, from Etruscan Press in 2017. And numerous books of translations with such presses as Penguin Classics and W.W. Norton. His work has appeared in such publications as Best American Poetry, the Paris Review, and Poetry Magazine. Please join me in welcoming Aaron Poochigian.
Thank you very much. I want to start by thanking Alex and Chelsea for hosting the event, for Susan for staying up so late, and also I just want you to know, I mean, Susan, whose poetry I've admired, I just randomly ran into her with my mother at the Globe Theatre in London when my mom and I were in England. It was amazing. I was so excited. And then also, I would like to thank very much Bill Baer, the legend of the University of Evansville, whom I've just met this evening. Also, those of you whom I haven't met in person or in sight, excuse me, I'm grateful that you're here. Sally Thomas, Jim Moonen, thank you very much for being here. I'm going to read a number of poems, but I'll keep it short. This first poem is from my first book with Able Muse Press called The Cosmic Purr. It's about a band that fell apart and then had a reunion show 20 years later. Reunion show. Remember Rage, the way we used to love it, and what mad masks we wore when we began. Think of the shrieking eagle on our van, the decal, with its wings of flame, and our prophetic name, the downward spiral, the viral expansion of it, the perks and packed arenas before the groupies got between us, the label dropped us, and the fad wound down. Boys, since this bar is in a nowhere town, let's pound out with our amps cranked up to 10, sincerer tribute to the angry art than we could handle at our start. The blasphemy we hurled against the world back then was out of season. Now we have damned good reason to smash things up like ruined men. And all my lyrics will be from the heart. Oh, thank you for clapping. Such a curious medium. I'm just getting used to this Zoom medium. Excuse me. This is a poem from my second book with Able Muse Press, Manhattanite. And it is about King Herod of Judea and his second wife, Herodias, and his stepdaughter, Salome. You may have heard of them. It's called Happy Birthday, Herod. Like always, Herod's birthday is today, and I can hear the tambourine brioso. I can hear the oboe skirl. Like always, Salome is getting down to business, veil by veil. Her eyes are green. All other eyes obscene, ravishers of a writhing girl, are piercing what is see-through anyway. Like always, without fail, something repulsive has been done. Under the Dead Sea sun, another sort of flesh. That corpse, I mean, the headless one, is summoning the blowflies, fresh gratification for a mother's grudge. Like always, who am I to judge? Indifferent to whatever moral thing a servant might be carrying around the party on a tray, I stand with stiff voyeurs, devouring those curves of hers, worshiping the elastic, the orgastic. Salome, forgive me. Herod's birthday is today. I'd like to read next a number of poems that aren't, oh, thank you. I'd like to read next a number of poems that aren't any books. I've just written them recently during the pandemic here in New York City, and trying to come to terms with this vibrant city that I adore, New York City. Yes, sort of subjected to this disease. It's just called NYNY 2020. It is fitting now to grieve over a loss of vigor, common to pack up and leave for bleached suburbs and bigger skies for a clean elsewhere. But studying from above rats in a desolate square, I still can only love this town, though she is a hooker who favors men of wealth. I'm staying because I took her in sickness and in health. But is she even alive? Gone are the buskers and cluttered bazaars, and my favorite bazaar in Hell's Kitchen is shuttered. There's no more sipping wine at Zinc to the joy of the blues. Abandoned mattresses line the echoing avenues. J. Crew, Models, goodbye, and goodbye, Neiman Marcus. I'm staying until I die, a lover over a carcass. Oh, thank you. Yeah, bleak, but I'm staying. This is a poem that I'm grateful for. There are poems we write and we love them and we send them out into the world, and there are poems that we're just grateful for, that we fear, that we suspect were sent to us by some outside force. And so I can't even take credit for this poem. Someone else sent it to me. We'll see if you like it. It's called That Too. The wind will blow away someday. Insider traded stocks, racehorses, croquet, the gold in old Fort Knox. The love we pursue, I say that too, the wind will blow away. The wind will blow away someday. The church's Gothic facade, pews where the faithful pray, the ubiquity of God. What's held to be true, I say that too, the wind will blow away. The wind will blow away someday, the statues in the square, the words with which I play, good times and my despair. All that I do and say, that too, the wind will blow away. All right. Oh, thank you very much. Yes, I think I just have 3 more poems. I'm going to keep it brief, and then we can have a question and answer series. This is another of those poems for which I am grateful. It's called American Osiris, and it was inspired by watching my nieces play a game called Dead Man, which is like tag. You say, dead man, come alive on the count of number 5. And then whoever's the dead man has to chase around the other people and tag them. And I was fascinated by this. I did not know it. And so I wrote American Osiris. Dead God, come alive on the count of number 5. 1, 2, 3, 4. I sense dejection in the vegetation. I get how red a sun is going down. And there they go, the dogs all over town, howling like widows. Ambush, mutilation, dump sites across state lines, the deed is done. Street lights will keep on burning all night long in memory of you, the strong seed giver, the delight, the vital one. It's useless, but I want to strew funeral flowers, the orchid, the iris. Traffic on the avenue is sighing for the loss of you, American Osiris. I smell the crime. In Jersey, there's a scow tugging like rubbish your indignant liver up the Passaic post-industrial river. And all the sap in you has turned crude now and soaks from ruptured pipes into the prairie. Your sex is wild boars goring Arkansas. Who axed you, handsome? Who has dumped you raw on this democracy, this cemetery? Sorrow has spread from coast to coast like a saccharine song or a seasonal virus. You are what weighs on us the most. Darling and carcass, God and ghost, American Osiris. Dead God, come alive on the count of number 5. 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, thank you very much. I'll just read 2 more poems. This is a poem I wrote when I actually had a house in California, in Fresno, California, my ancestral estate, which I have subsequently left. But I had a lanai, a screened-in porch, and I would sleep out there often. And this poem is about a dream that I had while I was sleeping on my lanai. Hush now. Soon as the shift to darkness in the sky left me alone to my own dark lanai, I must have slipped off somewhere wild, since wan and long-haired, with a cowgirl flannel on. This chick was crooning like a lullaby, lyrics about a whole world gone awry. Hush, little pretty, hush, there. Day is done and night has won, and ending times is everywhere. Don't cry, 10 years of drought, the plow is rust, the harvest dust, there's nothing left to fret about. Wolves long ago got through the fence, circled the fold, and as of old, done massacred the innocents. It's peaceful now. The mockingbird that trilled before don't sing no more. Papa's been gone for months, no word. Hush, little pretty, hush, there. Day is done and night has won, and ending times is everywhere. She blew a kiss, dissolved, and there was dawn, smog red, a credible phenomenon. Steel mesh, immured, buzz, a frantic fly. Wild sirens were approaching. Hush it by. And I'll end, oh, thank you. Thank you. I'll end before the question and answer, and we three, I think Susan and Bill and I would all love to have questions. I'll end with just one brief poem before we do the question and answer. This is the last poem in my forthcoming book from University of Evansville Press, American Divine. It's called The Living Will. Too grizzled now to play the wunderkind, too apt to sit where I have often sat. I, Aaron von Poochigian, now that my nose has thickened and my hair has thinned, do hereby most imprudently rescind the rule book I propounded, all my sessile growths and impediments, so that a vessel beholden only to the waves and wind, I may be free to drift out of the bay. Hereafter, I shall whiff the fragrant coasts of Araby, Dundea, and Cathay, and further out, beyond the round world's spalling margin, hear Odysseus's ghosts squeaking like hinges. Hear the sirens calling. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Aaron. What a treat this has been this evening. Why don't we give one more silent hand for Susan and Bill and Aaron? And it sounds like the readers would invite and love some questions. And so if anyone has a question and you'd like to just unmute yourself and ask, that would be great. We can take a little bit of time for that.
So I don't exactly have a question, but I was looking at this book this morning. It was
It's a great
signed
book.
Wilbur, you know, because you won that prize. Aaron.
Yes.
And I was teaching with him, you know, sort of the you know, the helpful person.
Yes.
At some conference, like about, I don't know, 20 years ago. But I was thinking of that book because I just looked at it this morning again. You know.
Yes.
Wonderful poet.
I think of Richard Wilbur as the consciously optimistic poet, and I hold him out in front of me as an ideal, in that I am not a particularly optimistic person, and this has been one mean mother of a year. But I have written poems I regard as inspired by Richard Wilbur only in that I insist on being optimistic and not in being tragic and self-indulgent. But I think Susan and Bill might be able to talk about that both as, as poets and prose writers. There's this constant war when you're writing your poetry between whether to be on the dark side or the light side. And I worship Richard Wilbur because he's always on the side of the light.
Yeah.
I have a question for Bill. You've been involved in script writing as well as writing novels. how has script writing affected your novel writing? Like, do you take lessons from one area and apply them in the other area, and perhaps tend to make your novels tight like scripts?
Boy, that's a hard question. I think they do play off each other. I mean, scripts are all dialogue, right? And dialogue is crucial in a novel. So I think doing that for years gave me a lot of practice when I started writing the novels. I couldn't really get to the novels full time till I retired. So poetry allowed me to, keep my hand in the literary world in the meantime. But I think especially with dialogue, and I'm very big on plot, which is, I guess, one of the reasons why I'm doing mysteries now. My hero in the mystery world is Ross MacDonald. I don't know if any of you guys have read Ross MacDonald. He's better than Hammett, and he's one of the three big ones, but he's not as well known as the other two. So anyway, I don't know if that answers the question, John, but they certainly play off each other.
Thanks.
Howdy all, this is a question for Aaron. Just curious, a longtime fan, first time caller. How do you decide on a format for a book, whether you're going to be able to link things together as a poetic novel, or you're just going to have poems collected around a theme, or is it just the whims of the muse that you seduce?
Thank you for asking that, Daniel, and it's my pleasure to meet you in person. My ambition for a book, when my first book came out, I just wanted all my best poems to be in it. But subsequently, I've become more discriminating. And I want the book to be a gestalt, to be more than the sum of its parts, so that a reader encountering it will appreciate not just each individual poem as something to be appreciated and enjoyed, but that the book has an arc and that the book has meaning as a gestalt, as a book. And so with my most recent book, American Divine, that's coming out, in fact, with University of Evansville Press, there were a number of poems I composed after I got that contract, and I decided, no, these belong to the next book. Perhaps I'm doing something else. That book was focused on talking about the numinous religious experiences in America in the 21st century. And so I had thematically linked poems that were clustered around, yes, just that sort of kernel, and decided to exclude other poems. I hope that I have answered your question. Yes.
Yes, you definitely have. It's a tough row to hoe with confidence to say, this one's good, but it's here's my darling, I've got to kill it for now.
Yeah.
Yep, answered greatly. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. Any more questions?
I have one question for our readers. I wondered how you all are, Aaron, you read one poem that you said you had written during the pandemic, and I wondered how you all are responding to the current moment in your writing. All of the things or parts of the current moment.
Yes, I'll start by answering, and then I hope Susan and Bill, yes, will answer as well. I confess, when the pandemic struck, it was the middle of March in New York and everything was shut down, I fled to California to my mom's house. I went home to mama. I was dried up creatively and I just translated Baudelaire, Charles Baudelaire, the French poet, for 3.5 months and got a contract to do that and did that. Because I felt, I wrote a couple of pandemic poems, but so many people were writing them. And it's hard to tell what, hard to separate the wheat from the chaff. And I just wanted basically to distract myself from the doldrums of the situation that I was in. And so translation was a good way for me to do that. Susan and Bill, how did you deal with the coronavirus situation?
Not very well, to be honest. I can't say that I've written anything about the pandemic. I think I was sort of moved to write something about nature and the environment to some extent. And then I think in a certain way, an odd thing that happened was the pandemic sort of usurped everything else that we've been thinking about. And I must say, it hasn't really been something that that I've written about. I think I've responded to the pandemic actually by reading lots of prose, oddly. So, you know, I would say that it hasn't for me been anything that I have been dealing with in poetry. I don't know about Bill. I don't know.
Very similar to that. I mean, for me, I guess it's just too close for me to write about yet. I guess I need more distance, so I really haven't done anything. As far as, you know, the life I live, I'm one of these people that always has a million projects waiting for me, which is very nice because it keeps me busy and out of trouble. So I just have worked on all kinds of things through this as kind of hunkering down. One final thing. Yes, I'm kind of funny looking at this age, but I do not have a red head. I look like a cherry apple, I mean, a candy apple. I don't know what it is, because you all look very nice. And there's this.
You look great, Bill. You look great with your baseball hat.
I really don't have a red head. But anyway, enough of that.
The thing that I realized because of the other thing I realized because of the pandemic, actually, now that you mention it, is because I actually had more travel planned this year than I'd ever had planned in my life. And every event and every thing that was connected, you know, with my book and with poetry was canceled due to the pandemic. And I think that these Zoom readings are really, you know, very heroic because, you know, that's really all we have. But it also made me realize how inspiring it is to actually meet with other poets in person, even if it's only, you know, once a year, you know, coming from, you know, a place where English is not the native language. So it made me realize how valuable, you know, the communities, the different poetry communities really are, you know, and that the virtual community can never replace that. So that was something I definitely learned from this. Let's hope, you know, the future is actual.
Thank you all. I'm wondering if we maybe have one more question for any of tonight's writers.
Hi, my name is Gina Gruz. I'm a Russian poet who lives in New York, and I have a question for Susan Desola. You live in Holland right now, right?
Yes.
So how do you see integrating?
I'm sorry, you fell away.
Hi. How do you see integrating?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
Yeah. So how do you see American poetry or American poet fitting into a European culture, especially the Dutch culture that is known for its art and its Mondrian and Utrecht Caravagistes and so on? How do you see that to be integrated or being injected into your writing, please?
I think it actually has a great deal. It really has a great deal. I mean, you know, it's it's very odd to actually, I'm still American. It's very odd actually to live between cultures. And I think that I read somewhere once that very, very much disturbed me, which was that every expat has a certain amount of moral failing somewhere, which enables them to live as an expat. And I don't know, I mentioned this to another poet, and he was extremely in very strong disagreement, and he felt very strongly that poets who live actually on the interstices of cultures actually have a great deal to offer because they are between cultures. And whether that's translation or whether that's, viewing things from a different perspective. I would say that that living here, certainly Dutch art. I mean, you mentioned Dutch art. I mean, that's really had a very big impact on me, living here in this in close proximity to these incredible paintings. So I think that is also something that I very much wanted to understand and probably see with some mixture, of naivete or foreignness, which is not necessarily a bad thing. So, you make the best of it. There's definitely downsides, but it does give you, a very odd point of view on certain things, which can be useful and interesting. So, I would say that one thing I do miss, speaking of Able Muse and the commitment to form embraced by so many of its poets, is I would say that it's even harder to meet people who are interested in writing in form over here than it is in the United States. So that's something that I actually miss yet more, because Dutch contemporary poetry is is not very interested in form in the way that some of us are. So that's something that is a bit of a loss. And it also makes those trips home yet more valuable, where we get to focus on craft and other aspects of poems.
All right, thank you. It sounds that the American poetry now is taking the form of Dutch art back then. Thank you for your perspective. It's beautiful.
Thank you.
Thank you for the reading and all the poets who participated. It was great.
Thank you.
It's so nice. It doesn't even feel like it's 2 a.m. Yeah. Feels like we should go for a drink.
Does anyone have a final question before I let Alex close out with some remarks?
Well, I did have one last question for Susan. Susan, how did you get so good at rhyming? I'm so jealous. Maybe you could explain a little bit and then I could practice.
It's probably a psychological tick. I don't know.
No.
No, I don't know. I think actually also living with 2 languages, makes you also hear those things. I hear, it's actually a very strange place to be. You hear puns in words because you're slightly mispronouncing them, or you hear things differently. I really don't know. I mean, I think I rhyme about half the time when I write poetry, but I think it's just so powerful. It's just such a powerful thing. You might want to ask Aaron as well, because, I think anyone who can rhyme carcass with Neiman Marcus, as he did tonight, could probably also tell us.
You are really, really good at it.
Thank you.
You're one of my robots.
It's nice to hear. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you everyone for your questions. Thank you again to Aaron and Susan and Bill. And Alex, I think you wanted to finish. Thank you so much for organizing this.
Thank you, Chelsea, for the fantastic hosting. And thank you all for showing up. And I'd especially like to thank Aaron and Bill and Susan for the fantastic reading. And I'll also say that this is only the beginning, as we'll be having more of this type of events in the near future. I would especially like to invite you all to attend Aaron's Masterclass happening tomorrow. For those who are interested, I'll have the sign-up link in the chat. And I also like to announce that we'll be having another reading on the 27th with 3 of Able Muse Press poets, Gary Green, Billy Lighthouser, and Sally Thomas. And you're all invited to attend. That will be on January 27th, around the inauguration time. And I hope you can all make it. Thank you again. Goodbye and good night. See you soon.
Thank you so much, Alex.
Thank you all.
Thank
Nice
you,
to meet you, Alex.
Oh, nice to meet you too.
Hi, Emily.
Give it
You
up, y'all.
specialize now.
Hello.
Bye, Susan.
Bye, Meredith.
Good night. Good night.
Good night,
Hey,
Aaron.
John
Good
boy.
night.
Man, man. Yeah.